Alright, well, I guess it's just going to come on and start working. Alright, let's roll with it. This is me. In fact, that's my boat. Actually, it's not my boat. It's my neighbor's boat. It's before I was here. My boat. Then would have been up the river. At the dock, still. There is my boat. This one. She is a 45-foot Starrett and Jinx. And we took her from there. Down the river. This, by the way, is where I park. So we come up the river here, park our little dinghy here. Yeah, we're building a new cabana. We park our dinghy right in this area here. And we'll park our vehicles here. Bathrooms and amenities. Got new food trucks and all that stuff down in this area here. It's done a real nice job of the place. Anyways, that is English Landing Marina. And that is my driveway. Down the river. Down here to where this blue dot's at. Alright, so that's where I live. St. Augustine. Noted here. Come on now. There's the fort. Alright. Now, Florida. Alright. A lot of people don't seem to know their maps very well. So, let me go through some stuff here real quick. Bring all this out here. There's America. There's South America. See this little spot right here? Does that look natural to you? See the big rectangle? See the rectangle here? See this trench here? See how this is a straight, like somebody dug it trench, not a curved trench here. Not like the Marianas Trench, where it's another curved trench, but this one's a very straight, like somebody dug it trench. Look at that. Got me looking. Like, wow, I mean, this is what really caught my attention. It's Puerto Rico. Montserrat. Over here on the side. British Virgin Islands. One of my good friends from the restaurant is from there. Told me some stories. Dominican Republic. Notice how this is all worked earth. In a big rectangle. In a big rectangle. I noticed that. And when I noticed that, I was like, oh, that's a big rectangle. It's like 300 miles by 600 miles when I did the thing. And I'm like, yeah, it's a big... Oh, wait a minute. Wasn't that Atlanta's story? Wasn't there a big rectangular growing plain in the Atlantis story. So I went back and I read the Atlantis story. Well, guess what? That's not Atlantis. No, no. Atlantis. See, when he describes the story of Atlantis, they didn't know about any of this. This was off the map. All they knew was this. This was their entire world. All right? And Greece, as he described it, was right here. And, get rid of that. All right. He described Greece. And he described what it used to be like when all this was fertile land. And he described after the cataclysm how it was all washed away and all the fertile land was gone, and all that was left was these rocky parapets of islands that stick up where the ground used to be. This used to be such high and fertile land that it was dug out within, and they lived inside the earth here because there were layers, and it was deep. Read the story for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Please, don't take anybody else's word for it. I want you to go back and read that Atlantis story, because it describes this land as it was, rich and fertile, and this is where the Athens warriors that pushed back the Atlanteans who had invaded all the way up to here. They had conquered all this. Where I'm putting my finger over here, they basically conquered that. When they pushed to that, Athens here pushed back. And that was the story they described. That was the battle they described. And the Athens, oops, didn't mean to do that. All clumsy like. Ancient Athens people here pushed back the Atlanteans, and then everything sank. And that's when this turned into what it is now. Before, it was described as rich, fertile land. That's a template. That's a template. Now, what they described was outside the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Straits of Gibraltar, as we call it. Okay. Outside these gates, boom, through this strait, they describe the Atlantic Ocean. And they say on the other side, people get hung up that the circle part of Atlantis was part of a much bigger land, and then they throw you off by calling it an island, so you're looking, oh, maybe that's Atlantis. Well, they didn't know anything. It could have been anything out here, but it had to be as big as they were talking about, and what they were describing was as big as this whole area. Well, if you look out in the ocean, what's as big as this whole area? Maybe even bigger. This, well, does it fit the description? Here's where it fits the description. The oblong growing plain, 3,000 stadia in length, 2,000 stadia wide, was Florida when it was light blue here. That was our shoreline 20,000 years ago. About the time Atlantis sank, about 13,000 years ago, it sank and then receded. Okay, so all this was covered up by water all the way up to here, kind of like that new map they're talking about where Florida's going to be gone and Georgia, and kind of see that line going on there. So this all got swamped. And then it rose back up. And when it rose back up, it followed the contour of the Grand Ditch, just like they said, where Atlantis, this growing plain, fell out of the straight line. It was almost rectangular, broke off all roundabout, flat and level otherwise. And where it fell out of the straight line, it followed, where it fell out of the straight line, it followed the curvature of the Grand Ditch. The Grand Ditch is the only fantastical part of the story of Atlantis, as you read it in Timaeus and Critias. And it said, it stopped at this point in the story, and it said because this was too big to be imagined, to be made. Whoa. Did not mean to do that. Okay. The Grand Canal. It's the only place in the story that Plato stops and says, okay. Or Socrates, I think, was actually telling the story. Anyways, read it for yourself. It says, we're at this grand ditch, 10,000 stadia long, about 1,400 miles. 1,400 miles would get you from over here in Texas, which is the start of this grand ditch, and I think the reason why we had to have this little spit of land out here in the desert. See that aqueduct? That's what we call our intracoastal waterway. And it is a coastal river that wraps all the way around the coast of America. Now, when you really get into it, there's wildlife refuges. Hold on a second. Let me bring you over to where it's really pronounced in Florida. Now remember, the shoreline actually came out to here. This was an inland feature, but as described in the story of Atlantis, its purpose was to capture all of the flow of all the main rivers, bring them back out to the Grand City. You guys want to know where the Grand City's at, don't you? Of course you do. So, all of the rivers flowed out to this one aqueduct, and this aqueduct redirected the flow to the Grand City. Well, you would need a pretty organized aqueduct to pull off such a feat, and that's why the Grand Banks look like that, because that was your aqueduct, and it flowed out here to the shore, and I would postulate that those buried asshole structures there aqueduct, old shoreline, and I would say right in the middle of that V, 6 miles inland from wherever the shoreline was at that time, you're going to find Atlantis proper. Buried rings, gold, silver, orichalc, which is rich mountain copper, and that's where you're going to find it. See all that stuff there? See all that? There's the Atlantis they're looking for, the city part, but this is all an aqueduct. Get out here, Florida. I know, crazy, right? Well, here's you some more crazy. See this river right here? This is called the St. John's River. And, like the Nile over in Egypt, this river, which starts at Lake George, right here, flows north to Jacksonville, to that intracoastal waterway. Oh my God. What do rivers do, folks? They flow downhill, path of least resistance, to the ocean, correct? Well, how come in America we have what we call the God, why is it fighting me? The Intracoastal Waterway, which is a coastal river system. And, oh my God. It is fighting me so hard. See this river system? It is, about 600 feet wide. And it hugs the coast all the way around America for about 1,400 miles. And it has canal systems. And it has a big reservoir lake in the middle that these ancient canal systems that we have built upon are already cut into the landscape for. This is sucking. And I'm a little frustrated. But that's your Atlantis. And what have I done? Wow. Okay, so Atlantis was the light blue, was the shoreline, and it reached all the way up to here, and I think all the way up the Mississippi Valley. I think they're basically describing it from the Mississippi Valley, the Appalachian Mountains, or the direct mountains, on the island of Atlantis. It was a giant island, all right, and the Mississippi Valley had water in it, I think, as it was described. Now you can go anywhere in Louisiana here, and as you get closer in, and this definition starts popping here, I don't even know where we're at, but I promise you they're everywhere. Oh, look at those canal systems. These are the bayous of Louisiana. These are the swamps of Louisiana, and I just picked a random place, okay? Do this yourself, and you'll see that we've landed on and built in some of these places, but most of it is just swamp. When you watch the Axemen and Shelby the Swamp Man and all that stuff, you can pick any spot you want, I know some highlights, and you don't have to look in the fancy places. Here, one of the Lake Charles. Got some really good ones. There we go. Lake Charles, I believe, has some of the famed markets out here in the swamp. Here you go. Have fun with that one, folks. Have fun with that one. You find you that one, and you figure out what it does and doesn't do, and how long it's been there. Like I was saying about Shelby and the Axemen series. If you see them going down those long straight canals with those cypress that they're talking about how old they are, well, we haven't been here as long as those trees have. So how did we carve those straight canals for those trees to grow back on since we've been here? So who carved the straight canals? Huh? Huh? Think about it. Okay, look, just look, this is a wildlife refuge. Now, some people will tell you that these are oil exploration canals. I promise you it costs way too much to dig in a canal to do it just anywhere. And they wouldn't let you do it in the middle of an oil or a wildlife refuge, would they? Would they? Oh, well, look at that. Somebody better get the EPA, because it looks like somebody is digging canals in the middle of the wildlife refuge. But you can go to any of these wildlife refuges and you'll find these canals because they're literally everywhere. Everywhere. They defy logic other than somebody dug them. They defy nature. Don't let these white lines fool you. We didn't come down and put a bunch of white lines in. That's the white lines on the pictures. But this grid, as described in the Atlantis story, exists. You want to see something else crazy? You should be able to see as you zoom in on the United States, for instance. Like, look, you can see all this stuff. I'll get to this stuff down here. I figured out what that was. That's where shit got crazy. Okay. Now, let's go out here in the middle of the country. Yeah, here you go. Nothing out here, right? Not a whole lot. Arkansas. Now, as we start to get in here, at a certain point, you'll literally see a grid. Wow. Okay. See that grid, folks? When you read the story of Atlantis, they talk about this grid. There were 60,000 of them from the ocean to the mountains. And each one had to supply a certain amount for the war chariot. They went into every detail of the society, and he finally stopped at like the congresses, what we call the congresses, of how the place was organized, and says that I could go on, but it would just be boring. Timaeus and Critias, read it, because they knew all this was here. See that Mississippi Valley? I imagine it had enough water in it to consider this a separated by water land, and that is your Atlantis, as described in the story, I promise. Going on from that, so I figured that out. Drove myself batshit, because here's what I figured out. They knew it was here. Pre-developed real estate, mineral rights, technology, boom. All the reasons to keep it secret. So I figured that out. And the fact that they had hidden it and they never let you look where it's actually at, and they do all this, you'll see this thing where they talk about the story and how it's a big myth. Come on, really? It's being a jerk. All right. They talk about the story, and it's a big myth, and then they put an island out here in between us and the New World. And they go, yeah, see, it must have been there that they're talking about. But they didn't know this existed when they wrote the story. So we're looking for a giant land the size of this and this combined. And here it is. Here's the central island of Atlantis. The Mississippi Valley separated it, so this is the island, and this is the surrounding continent. Alright, but after I figured all that out, drove myself batshit, I'm like, well, what part of Atlantis is this down here? Because this is obviously something, right? Obviously. So I'm like, I just kept thinking, what is that? What is that? What is that? And I thought, wait a minute. I know what that is. There's some of it down here, too. That's worked earth. I've seen them work earth like that before. Because that's a strip mine. This is all one big strip mine. It's exactly what a strip mine looks like. And I mean, there's some weird detail to this. Okay, can you zoom in on this? How come I can see current sweeps around that stuff? See what I'm saying? Why can I see the current sweeps there? That looks like a digital artifact up there, overlays. This one, I'm not so sure. What I know for sure is that that's more of an anomaly to me, since this is such a USO hotspot, unidentified submersible objects all the time, right here south of Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic. This area right here is infamous for them. And this big rectangle is a strip mine. And I think what this straight trench is they dug something out. Well, what would be so valuable that it'd be worth doing that? And that's where I came up with a theory that ties all the theories together. Let me zoom way back out here. That's as big as it'll let me do it. All right. So, you got Africa and Europe. You got South America and North America. The Pangea theory says that this was all one big island and it broke up. Alright. Continental drift says that's bullshit. Sorry, finger in the way. Continental drift says that these continental plates are always drifting. They just happen to look like they've lined up. And that's the way that's working. Well, here's my theory. I say that it was all connected, but not like a Pangea. I say we head across to the planet and at this crack called the Atlantic Ridge that matches the shoreline on both sides. I say that the crust of the planet was cracked by a golden and copper and some kind of an aluminum, maybe alloy object that struck the crust of the planet in the event that killed the dinosaurs and left the right here by Marina, Mexico, half in the water, half on land, is supposed to be, right here, a 123-mile wide crater called the Chicxulub crater. Now, it's said that this crater here has nothing to do with the fact that the Gulf looks like a big round circle around it. I disagree. I say that this object struck the planet with such violence that it cracked the crust of the planet, that at that point didn't even have oceans, but it had fresh water within the crust, and it had these circulatory systems built within it like veins. There were springs with fresh water. There were lakes, rivers to lakes, and it evaporated into an atmosphere, and it was a perfect ecosystem. Salt water is contaminated water. How is this water contaminated? Well, this object struck, implanted like a golden bullet, cracked the planet. These are ballistic features. Okay? A ballistic impact cracked these pieces of shell. They've been floating free. The planet's been repairing itself from the cracks ever since. They have been shifting like continental drift, but they weren't together like an island, like Pangea says. They were just part of a solid crust. We didn't have floating islands on the planet until this event occurred. Follow me? So, somebody came in here and they said, we're going to dig out the core. They dug the core. They strip mined this area. They strip mined this area. They strip mined this area. These mountain ranges are a ballistic feature. That's why that was the disruption that forced them into mountain ranges, was this impact that split the crust of the planet violently. All right, at that point, this mountain range extended all the way down to the mountain ranges you find in Cuba. And you can still see some in the Dominican Republic. And down in Puerto Rico, it's very mountainous down there. Very rocky. Big parapets. But Florida's flat and level. Why? Because they strip mined that down as far as they could. Because at that point, when they had cracked the planet, these tributaries that were underground became fractured. And the water came out, and it flooded the surface of the planet. That's where the salt water came from. That's why we have large mammals that went from having a primarily land planet to a primarily wet planet, adapted to the water. Your big mammals, your dolphins, your whales. All right? Why do I say gold? Well, here's what I say happened. The legends of us being created as something that was on this planet and someone that came here to mine gold. Wow. Maybe they could have done that. Here's Puma Punku. I think this civilization we're talking about stretched from here where my finger's at all the way up here into the Americas. This is the primary area of Atlantis and its kings, as described in the story. Go back and read it for yourself. You figured that out. But with these mines, I say gold, copper, orichalc is described in the story of Atlantis. Plato describes orichalc, a rich mountain copper that's no longer found on the planet, but was found in abundance in this area. Okay? In our history, we know that the Indians said they found gold on the ground. This is what the Spanish took back. How'd they find the gold on the ground? Well, when this civilization that was loaded with gold and thought nothing of it, and had their temples and their trinkets and had plenty of gold in their society, and their civilization was sunk, well, gold isn't much affected by the elements. So, especially not water. It does very, very well in salt water. It's amazing. So, when the waters receded and this land dried out, these Indians walking out here onto the mud shoals found gold laying on the ground. It's already carved. They said it came from the gods. We didn't listen. Makes a whole lot of sense, doesn't it? Keep looking at that. Tell me that looks natural. So, maybe they created slaves to mine their gold. Maybe they left those slaves here because what they really wanted was the gold. Rich mountain copper orichalc, like we find in the 30,000 plus year old mines up here in chunks the size of Volkswagens that we can't explain. Same orichalc that they were talking about. Rich mountain copper. Why do I say aluminum? You know where aluminum comes from? Puerto Rico. The dirt in Puerto Rico is orange, full of aluminum. What would cause so much aluminum in the dirt that it turned orange? Unless maybe a craft vaporized on impact to where its particulates turn the dirt around it orange. Kind of makes sense. They weren't after the orange dirt here. They didn't care about the aluminum. They wanted the gold. They wanted the copper. They really wanted the gold. Why do you think gold is so important? Maybe we were created to mine it in the first place, and they've taught us to worship it ever since. Because worshiping gold keeps us slaves forever. Here's some wild shit. There's Bruce's golden bullet theory. Peace out.